Beyond and hello everyone, my name is Jonathon Dornbush and this is Podcast Beyond, IGN's weekly PlayStation show where I know we're late this week and I thought, we'd be able to cover all of the big PlayStation news that would happen finally this week, and then PlayStation decided to not put out any news this week. Thank you for that. Anyway, though.
You can't cheat the system, Jonathan.
No,
you tried.
Herman knows.
It has to happen after we record the show, and
of course.
That means it will happen after we record the show.
Yeah, it's like a slot machine, Dorno. You can't win, no matter how much money you put in that thing.
I am absolutely convinced that tomorrow morning they will put up a state of play on like a Saturday at 9 a.m. just to mess with us at this point. But no, of course, we do have plenty to catch up on, as well as both in the PlayStation world and the third-party world, plus another doozy of a memory card that follows up on a previous one that we'll get to a little bit later in the show. But before we do all that, I'm joined this week by Brian Altano.
Hello and beyond.
And Lucy O'Brien.
Hello and beyond.
Hello and beyond. Before we get into all the news and the nitty gritty of what's going on this week, I do want to briefly mention, as a heads up, we'll have more details in the weeks to come. But as a heads up to all of our YouTube viewers, the YouTube Beyond channel that you are currently watching this episode on will soon not have new updated episodes. The show will still be going on, but this show, as well as all the other IGN podcasts like NVC, Podcast Unlocked, and GameScoop, will be moving over to a centralized YouTube channel where you'll be able to find all of the shows in one destination. Again, the show will still be the same. There aren't any changes coming to the format of the show or anything going on over there where we'll suddenly all have to be competing for the same hour of time amongst all the shows. We'll all be there. You'll be able to find Beyond going there. I'll have more information about the channel itself, links to be able to send you over there so you can start subscribing and following along there. But just as a heads up, in the coming weeks, that shift will be happening. We hope you'll join us over there because the show will continue to be Beyond, and we'd love to have that community follow us over there. But I just wanted to give you some advance warning before that happens. Definitely don't want a last minute switch to catch anyone off guard. So stay tuned for more information in the coming weeks on that. Excuse me, but other than that, might as well just jump into the news. One thing that, is a little bit of old news at this point, but I do definitely want to cover in sort of the context of this year in PlayStation that we might be getting, is that Ratchet and Clank finally has a release date. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart is going to be hitting PS5 on June 11th, which I know previously, I believe it was at Gamescom last year, the Insomniac heads who were speaking with Jeff Keighley on that show had mentioned it was coming in the launch window. Perhaps it is up for debate whether June 7 months after the console launch falls in the launch window.
No, it's not.
I mean, for many people it is because, they're still without a PlayStation 5.
That is true.
So
That's
for
very
them,
true.
it is launch window.
That is true. If you're not available, if you're not capable of buying a PS5 until like May, then yes, technically launch window. I feel like the term launch window has lost all meaning. Like there was a while there where it was definitely like the first month or two, and then it turned into like 3 or 4 months. And now we're like that is in a 7-8 month territory. Like that's ridiculous. I'm sorry. I'm very excited for this game. I just don't think this is the launch window for the PS5.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I cannot wait. Like this is easily and we'll get to this in a little bit, of the games that are actually concretely coming out this year and probably aren't getting delayed. I think Rift Apart is probably my most anticipated, especially as a huge, like, lifelong Ratchet and Clank fan. This one just looks beautiful and really takes advantage of the PS5. But yeah, in terms of launch window, not that we had a shortage of PlayStation games, at launch. It's a silly phrase that to me has lost meaning in the same way things like, a beta versus a demo has lost meaning. Like a game that gets a beta a week before launch, that's not a beta, that's a demo. A beta a year beforehand probably can, give you some useful info for that. Same as like
Reboot, remastered, like people have played fast and loose with those terms.
Oh yeah, those. And then my favorite, it was an ongoing joke, they finally got out of it, but Fortnite has technically was in early access for like 4 years, or like 3 or 4 years, something crazy. And every time my girlfriend and I would load into a match, she'd make the joke of, even like late last year, oh, we have early access, that's so awesome, even though we've been playing it for 2 years. Like words can lose meaning a bit in this industry. But anyway,
that game's going to be really big when it finally comes out. I think just you wait.
I'm really excited. It's going to have its moment at some point. Maybe they'll have a big crossover eventually. But yeah, it's I'm super excited for this one. I know we've sort of talked about our excitement for Ratchet and Clank since those reveal gameplay sessions late last year, the middle of last year. What I wanted to at least start off with on the Ratchet and Clank part of it was, Brian, I know especially, and I want to start with you, we've talked a lot about it on the show. Like, obviously, there's this push and pull of wanting to see some of the game before launch, and they have to show some of the game to get people excited. But, you know, we've had both the reveal demo and then an extended demo of Ratchet and Clank right now. How much more do you want to or feel like we need to see? And I guess conversely, how much do you think they're going to show us before the part comes out?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing because it's like I'm less sort of selectively, you know, worried about spoilers or something like that for a game like this.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate that almost everything they've shown us so far has just been like unabashedly pure boots on the ground gameplay. Like that is super cool to see. Like it is just like moment to moment. This is what you will be doing when you play this gorgeous, crazy looking game. It looks fun as hell, and it's not cinematics, it's not cutscenes, it's not you know, like bizarre CG trailers for the most part. It is just like, here's what this game looks like. And so I'm sold on it. Obviously there are people that will probably be like, I need to see more. But for me, like this game, I want to hold the controller and play this game. Like there's nothing really that they can show me that's going to twist my arm as much as being like, oh, that's how they did DualSense stuff with this game. Because I know this is going to be the next big one to like really, truly grab that tech and make something captivating. So I'm totally sold. I'm all in. If they want to keep showing more, I'll keep looking at it, but I'm good. I'm good to go.
Yeah, Lucy, I know we've also talked a bit about the hype cycle, and so I'm sort of curious just to get a beat on where you are with Ratchet, because like obviously we're all going to play it. We're coming at it, I think, from different like fan bases of the franchise and whatnot. But I definitely think this is one I agree with Brian in terms of like I think they're going to take really great advantage of the DualSense, and there's only so much you can tell me about that versus just actually getting to use the DualSense and feel how the guns are going to be different and wacky in their own ways. I don't know how you feel about like going into this one, how much more you expect we might see or want to see.
I mean, I think more is kind of a good thing in this case, mainly because I feel like PS5 owners, you know, they put a lot of money, they dropped a lot of money to get that thing. And I'm not saying that there's like a dearth of games to play on it, but in terms of like a showcase for what the PS5 can do, I think Ratchet is kind of the one, right? Like we haven't seen, you know, much of any of the other like first party games coming out this year, but like we saw that it takes full advantage of that SSD in such like a cool, remarkable PS5 only way. So, you know, I'm happy to see more. I'm happy for PS5 owners to like get more excited about something that only they can really experience. Because yeah, like Ratchet is definitely just the way that it utilizes that SSD. Like, what is it? It goes through sort of worlds and it cuts. Like,
yeah,
you know what I'm talking about?
The literal rifts just kind of like jump through. You'll have clearly there's at some point you'll have the ability to kind of shift the world as you're standing within it and kind of like hop from one point to the next without, you know, weird hitching going on. Like it's supposed to be instantaneous. Yeah,
right. And I've never seen anything like that, and it's definitely not something you could achieve on last gen. So for me, you know, I'm happy to see more. Obviously, you know, I don't need anything spoiled, but I'm happy to see more of how it utilizes the PS5 for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely stuff where. Oh, sorry, Brian, were you gonna?
No, go for it.
I was just going to say there's definitely stuff for, especially me as like someone who's, you know, followed the series for so long. Like I am very curious about who this mysterious other Lombax is who showed up in the end of the teaser trailer. But I also don't expect that to be a thing that we're going to get a 5-minute debrief on because it's very clearly part of the story. And I want to experience all of that as it's intended. But yeah, I think showing off 2 or 3 of the new weapons that they have and how they can tell us how they'll use the DualSense, but getting a sense of just how weird they're pushing that stuff, as well as Lucy, you were saying, the showing off. It is so cool to see Ratchet just jump from a forested region where he's being attacked by like pterodactyl-like creatures to a futuristic cityscape in an instant. And I like seeing that is, to me, the best way to sell someone on a PS5 that I've probably seen so far.
Totally. Yeah. And that's the other thing, is it's like a big selling point for the machine itself. You know, this will be my first Ratchet game. I never played one before.
Nice. Are you thinking about doing the reboot remake one from a couple years back, or are you just going to kind of go into this one? So.
I don't know. I mean, it's weird. I was always a Jack and Dexter person, and Ratchet and Clank always was like to me like, it's kind of just looks like Jack and Dexter, but not as good. And I know that that's not true. That's just my dumb observation from way back when. And I just never jumped on board. But yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I'll give it a spin, especially because you're such a priest at the Church of Ratchet.
Right. And I believe it's part of the PlayStation Plus collection on PS5.
It is, yeah.
It's pretty easy to just hop in. Yeah, like Lucy, I feel like you hinted at it a second ago, but and it feels weird saying this, like we said before, like so many people still can't get a PS5, but it does sort of feel like there was a little bit of a sort of momentum shift, a little bit of a slowdown after launch, as always happens with new hardware. In terms of software, we had like a really strong launch lineup, and then we rolled kind of right into Christmas and the holidays. And then like there was some stuff like Hitman, obviously, that made it multi-platform. But in terms of like stuff that's really like, oh, this is my reason, this is my big exclusive to turn on a PS5, things have definitely gotten a little bit more quiet. Again, millions and millions of people still can't get this console, so this is a stupid thing to complain about. But it was nice to see Ratchet pop up, to get a definitive release date, and to sort of be like, okay, we can start to look at what this year looks like. 6 months is 4 months or 5 months away, whatever it is pretty far right now. And I assume there's going to be tons of third party and sort of interesting indie stuff to play between now and then. But it is nice to start seeing like the future of first party stuff on PS5 to see where it goes.
Yeah, and it's I did want to bring it up in that context because as you were saying, it is both a thing that's easy to recognize as somewhat silly to be like, where are all the new games for the system when there are, of course, the 100 million plus people still on PS4s. And I kind of want to talk about both because it does help that this week we had our first Nintendo Direct, the first real Nintendo Direct in 15 plus months. And I bring that up to say that we see Xbox, mentioning headset updates. They announced a new Xbox Series X headset. We'll see them give some updates on the games. Right now, we see the PlayStation blog occasionally give updates. We've gotten a release date for Returnal, which is coming in April, as well as MLB in April. Excuse me. We know Deathloop is a console exclusive, as well as coming to PC, and that's coming in May. And then we'll get Ratchet in June. So we're sort of seeing the year kick off late April, early May of big game releases.
Yeah.
But, once things kick in there, I think it's going to be really exciting. On that front, I wanted to say, when do you think, guessing when we'll get a state of play is kind of like just a crapshoot. It could be literally tomorrow. It could be 6 months from now. Who knows? But like, we have this sort of concept that we're going to get a couple months of, a big PS5 release here and there through those 3 months. But like, are there any concerns from either of you that we are, a month and a half in, we haven't really gotten a sense of what PlayStation is looking at in terms of the scope of the full year? Like, we don't have details of when a state of play is coming. We don't really know what their PS4 plans are other than Horizon Forbidden West. It's sort of a weird in-between period, I feel like, for both consoles. Where the months ahead are a little uncertain on the first party front. And I was kind of curious to hear from you of like, do you feel, we had a lot of talk last year about Sony silence being deafening in the lead up to the PS5. Do we expect we might get a lot of silent Sony again this year? Does it feel like we're heading in that way?
Yeah.
Potentially. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, one thing that we sort of forget to talk about sometimes, because it has become like a Stockholm syndrome thing, is that like there is a pandemic still going on and timelines are just so malleable at the moment because of that. Like we don't know how that has affected timelines and workflow and production. Like we've got no real insight into that beyond what other developers have told us. But like I can't really imagine that that things that were planned for this year are still on track. And I also imagine that Sony is being really cautious because like things can change so quickly and things do take longer. And no one wants to do a cyberpunk, right? So the silence is kind of understandable in that regard.
Yeah, last year was like you said, there's a lot of overlapping factors. I think their secrecy was in part due to the coronavirus, but also because they didn't really want to show their hand. And now we're in an interesting spot where they're selling literally every single PS5 that becomes available, or scalpers are buying 99% of them. But either way, they're being sold, unfortunately. And so I think that's like they have less to hide this year. There's a couple of surprises, that I'm sure will pop out. But for the most part, I think, like, and we talked about this last week, the weird downside of the sort of E3 workflow imploding is that all these pieces of shrapnel have gone everywhere in terms of when and where we can expect to get news on anything, really. And so I do think that they will do more sort of selectively hyper-focused presentations, like quick drops where they go, hey, we're like, here's some cool indie games, here's some VR stuff we're doing, here's a sneak peek at a third-party game. But I don't really think that we're going to get like any sort of regular cadence of announcements, because I think that like they're still assessing every one of their studios, and I think they're probably saying, hey, take the time you need. Like Lucy said, the Cyberpunk thing's a big part of it. The coronavirus thing's a big part of it. Some companies have been able to pivot and adapt. I'm on Nintendo voice chat. We just covered the Nintendo Direct from this week. It doesn't really feel like Nintendo's had the sort of best, smoothest time of handling, the wake of the last year and change. And so I don't really think that like Sony is going to be in any rush here. I think they have two concurrently successful consoles happening in unison right now. They'll wind down one, ramp up the other, but I don't really expect to hear almost anything from them anytime soon. And I'd love to be proven wrong on that, because I love when they talk. It's the best thing, right?
It's always a joyful thing. Like, even whatever you felt about the Direct aside, it's hard to beat the anticipation we all felt in the 24 hours between the Direct being announced and happening this week. And same thing when we know a big PS5 showcase or a state of play is coming. It is always that, like, the anticipation of what can be is so exciting, regardless of kind of what ends up happening. But I totally agree with both of you in terms of it's impossible to fully calculate how COVID has affected every single studio in such different ways, and also just everything else happening. Obviously, like, we've seen the unexpected snowstorms and terrible weather that's hit so much of the US this week in places that don't have the infrastructure to support it. Even Bethesda, they were tweeting, some of that team was like, hey, updates to I think it was either Fallout 76 or the Elder Scrolls Online are going to be delayed because our team just doesn't have power anymore because we're all working from home. It's just, there are so many variables going on with the work from home situation, let alone now everything else that can happen as a result of that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's like Sony is a global company that is a hardware manufacturer. They also own several studios that are worldwide, all over the place, that are all sort of like impacted in different ways by this. Some not so much, some a ton. And I think there's also like Lucy said about the Cyberpunk thing. I think that's like that's going to be a big lesson going forward. And I frankly, it should have been a lesson before that. Like that was a very unique scenario in that that was obviously a piece of software that was rushed to market in what I would describe as kind of a grift to get a bunch of people in early on. But if you look at NPD, that game has essentially dropped off. And so you're not seeing the legs that something like The Witcher had. And so, yeah, they were able to pull off a bit of a heist early on, but I think in the long tail, that's not a good look. And that's what you want to see a game up there for a while. And so I don't really expect to see anything from the next God of War. Horizon feels like it's like a little further along, but I don't think we're going to hear anything from either of those games for a little bit. And I think that the first half of this year is going to be riding on the momentum and the fumes and the coattails, really, of like what they accomplished last year, which was one of the best years they've ever had, especially all things considered. The fact that they shipped so many amazing games and a brand new console last year is insane. It is one of the coolest achievements we've ever seen from a video game company, frankly. Like we forget, but like last year we had The Last of Us 2, we had Ghost of Tsushima, we had the PS5, we had Miles Morales. Like there's just, I mean, Demon's Souls.
Dreams came out at the beginning of last year.
Yeah, just insane, just insane. And so it's super cool. And I think that while I want more information and while I want more games, their number one priority right now it should be focusing on hardware production pipeline, getting consoles out onto the shelves so people can buy them again and enjoy all the stuff that, they put out last year and everything to come. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's in a normal year, that lineup would have been just like an all-timer incredible release window. And so the fact that all of that was able to come out within a single year, let alone a year where none of us knew what life looked like week to week, is just incredible. And yeah, I expect a bit of silence, but I don't fault them for it, especially as you were saying, like,
Totally.
who knows how each developer is impacted. Obviously, everyone's going through this in different ways. And also, it's one of those things where I think, speaking of Cyberpunk, still not available on PlayStation at the moment.
Right.
But yeah, you still can't buy
Holy
it.
shit,
Yeah.
I actually forgot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I forgot
mine's still
that.
installed, but like, yeah, it's so crazy.
Over 2 months and
my
you still can't buy it. Yeah.
Well,
that is
like,
wild.
the thing is, video games, and I've said this so many times, and it pisses me off, but video games are like video game development is frustratingly secretive compared to so many other mediums, especially film. We regularly get director's cuts and commentaries. When movies get announced, there's basically like a press release. Just yesterday, A24 was like, hey, Joaquin Phoenix and Ari Aster, who did Hereditary and Midsummer, are teaming up for their next movie. Here's the press release. Here's the people funding it. It is so like, it's so open book, right? But there's so much about video games that is so secretive. I would watch an entire documentary on how Sucker Punch shipped Ghost of Tsushima from home on mountain Wi-Fi. Like that's insane to me that studio was at the finish line of finishing one of the most gorgeous open world games ever made, and pandemic hit, and they all scattered into different places, and they somehow got that game out. But we just won't see that. You know?
Andrew, if you're listening.
Well, with that said, we do have an inside story. Check out Inside Stories on YouTube. It's our short documentary series, and we do have a very cool inside story about how Call of Duty was made from home.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a lot of developer access for that one, which was awesome. But it's like it felt like it was stuck together with tape.
Yeah,
like they just made it work somehow.
And Cold War is now one of the best-selling games in the US ever. I think it's like the 20th best-selling game ever, just in 2 or 3 months.
Right.
But yeah, and speaking of things along the lines of that, one, you should absolutely check out Inside Stories because it's a phenomenal series of documentaries we have going. But two, just on the like working from home situation, the Sumo Digital team behind Sackboy put out a small like 5-minute thing on the PlayStation YouTube that was about finishing that game from home too, and how that changed things. And obviously it's a bit of a different game than Ghost of Tsushima, but especially working toward the launch of the PS5 launch date game. It's just, I would happily watch every studio talk about that in detail because it's just so fascinating and so incredibly impressive that they were able to pull all of these things off, given the infrastructure that's currently available.
And if you're listening and you have worked on one of these games, please hit Dorno and myself up because we would love to hear your story.
Yes, we always want to be able to tell those stories more on IGN. So any devs who are listening, we want to tell those stories. Please let us talk to you about those stories because we find them fascinating, and I think the audience will too. But in terms of the silence of that, just to bring it back to it, I totally think it's okay that this is going to happen. And I kind of wanted to bring this up mostly as a like, when we hear games are going to get delayed, when we hear things are maybe being pushed, when we don't hear from a game for a little while, that's okay. And please understand the insane machinations that have to go on to make a game happen with hundreds of people from home in these current conditions is just crazy. I can only imagine. I can't imagine how unfathomably difficult that must be. But speaking of that, we are looking at, in terms of other announced PlayStation exclusives for this year, Horizon Forbidden West, Gran Turismo 7, and God of War. We've definitely seen Sony before, I think, not want to announce release dates when they don't have to, because we've seen delays happen pretty frequently with first-party games just by the nature of them. And so I think we're going to get release dates for those probably a bit closer to when they're coming out. My question is, I guess...
The sensible option in general, right?
Sorry?
Seems like the sensible option in general.
Yeah. Exactly.
From here on in.
In terms of this, I feel like Horizon probably still has a decent chance to come out this year, if only because it was simultaneously being developed for PS4, and PS4 could use a pretty big exclusive, this year to at least have one. Gran Turismo 7 is a total guess in my book. I have no idea the workflow of that studio and how long it's been in the pipeline. And God of War, because we only saw a teaser trailer, for me, feels like the one most easily to be pushed, like a teaser trailer that literally was a logo, feels like the one that could most easily be pushed in. But again, we have no idea the scope of it, whether it is going to end up being for PS4 either. I guess my question for both of you is, and Lucy, maybe we can start with you. Do you anticipate the three of these hitting the mark in 2021? Do you think we'll see this as part of the calendar? And if so, if you had to make a wild prediction, when do you think we'll see the first of them? Like, when do you think we'll get Horizon, let's say?
I think we have a chance to get Horizon this year.
Yeah.
I think GT7 and God of War are a ways out. I still think God of War is going to be a smaller game. I think it's not going to be like a half game, but I think it's going to be a smaller entry. Like I don't think it's going to be God of War 2. I think Horizon will hit. I think that they might be aiming to launch Horizon during the holidays. And yeah, GT7 I think could even, I think that'll be the last one out of the gate. God of War I think we'll see next year.
Brian, what about you?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with Lucy. Horizon feels like it could happen this year. God of War is interesting because, like you both said, we don't really know the scope or scale of what this is going to be. If this is going to be sort of like a Left Behind, if this is going to be a Miles Morales, like how long will this game be? And is that going to be enough for most people? Like Miles Morales was like sort of routinely pushed to the side by a lot of people who were just like, it's just DLC. And like, I feel like that's, we've kind of like lost, that word's kind of lost all meaning, that phrase, in terms of like covering what a game can be. But I also think it's like, we're in this weird spot where the value of video games is exceptionally high. It's $70 for a game, but it's also still a pretty good deal when you get a game for 60 or 70 bucks and it lasts you 30, 40 hours. But developers probably also want to tell smaller stories every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we've exactly found the right value proposition for that. That's a push and pull. And I think it's very difficult. And like the sort of the undercurrent line of how you price an experience versus how much you get in return, how you value art or content. If you look at something like Destruction All-Stars, I think as a $70 game that wouldn't have worked on PS Plus. I think that's, that's a great thing to jump into and mess around with. I think the review scores would have been much lower had it been a $70 thing, but it's hard to do that. On the flip side, like I want to see what Corey and the rest of his studio can do with a smaller scale God of War, but I don't know if the average audience wants that. I want them to tell the story they want to tell, and price the game in the way they feel comfortable pricing it. But there is a like distinct thing that happens specifically in video games where people say, I don't want to buy this game unless it's X amount of hours in return. And I do think that's interesting. I think the consumer is justified in feeling that way because games are expensive and they want value, but it's also, where does a smaller story fit in with something like that? Yeah. I also think, like, not to ramble too much, but one of the things we are kind of forgetting about is at some point this year, I assume Naughty Dog's going to be like, here's that big multiplayer Last of Us thing, that standalone thing, whether it's free to play, whether it's, priced or boxed. So I think that will fill some gaps while we wait for stuff. Last of Us and Uncharted multiplayer was like a gigantic hit, surprisingly, because it's like I've never really come to either of those franchises for that, but like it really resonates with people, it really sticks with people. So I do think that that's going to fill a hole at some point this year, and hopefully it'll be really fun.
Yeah, the Last of Us multiplayer in particular, Factions, was so good, and I feel like launching that as I'm with you. Like I could see it going free to play, I could see it being a paid experience either way. I think if you launch that as a with a deluxe edition of The Last of Us Part 2 on PS5, or you can buy it separately for $20-$30, I think that would be such a great thing to have in the fall. And I think especially PlayStation fans would fall pretty hard for that one if it's anything close to what Factions was. But yeah, I agree with you in terms of like, we haven't really cracked the code on how to, or not we, the developers and the people marketing these games haven't really found the way, I think, to properly convey why a smaller experience is still valuable and worth your time and money to the audience when so much of gaming buying decisions often come down to how many hours do I get out of it.
And as Brian said, right, like DLC is just such a damaging word. Well, it's not even a word; it's an acronym. But like, it's such a damaging, like, it's got such bad connotations because it's evolved. DLC as an additive content has evolved so much since like it was a thing. And I think it's crazy to me because when I think of Miles Morales, I think of it with the same fondness and the same, even more so. I think of it, more than Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like I feel like nothing was lost by being a smaller experience.
Yeah.
Totally.
Sorry to interrupt. I just felt very passionate about that.
No, totally.
That's a cool one too, because it's like how like that was a sort of budget, not budget size. That was like a smaller scale open world sandbox game, which we don't really see a lot of, right? Usually when people are like, we're going to tell a story, it's sort of on rails. Like something like Left Behind had some wiggle room, but that mostly had story beats that they had to hit. And Miles Morales is just like, well, here's a whole city, here's a whole open world game. It's just that the actual scripted story beat stuff is a little smaller than it was the last time. And at the same time, we had this like bizarre sort of, we see this on mobile, which is a sort of completely, I would say, dystopian hellscape when it comes to the race to the bottom pricing model, where if you like, there are games that you will buy on PlayStation 5 that are like $20-$30. And then you see it on iOS and it's like, they can't charge more than like $8. Like something like Dead Cells, like, is an awesome game. And it's like dirt cheap on phones because they know that people won't pay much more because most games are free or $1 or were for a very long time. And at the exact same time, you have this idea that like, if you're going to sell a $60 game, it has to have 100 hours of content. And so, it's very difficult to find the right spot there to kind of make everyone happy.
Yeah, it's a really strange space to be in right now. And like even thinking back to Lost Legacy, that was originally going to be DLC for Uncharted 4 and became such a big project that it spun out into its own thing. I, for one, like love that we get these smaller games in between. Of course, I've never been involved in development, so I could be completely off base. But to me, a game that is the size of Lost Legacy or a game that is the size of Miles Morales, one lets them somewhat reuse the foundation and build upon what they've already done without having to create the 2.0 version of it, but also lets them experiment in ways that if they take a risk on a game mechanic or a side mission in a Lost Legacy style thing or Miles Morales, if it doesn't work, well, it was only a 10-hour campaign that you had to deal with it in versus a 30-hour campaign. And if it does work, that means they have something really cool to integrate and enhance in the 2.0. I love that model and kind of hope we see it more. I want the Lost Legacies, the First Lights, the Miles Moraleses of Ghost of Tsushima, of Days Gone, of The Last of Us. Like, I want that to be because I also think it would be a more repeatable cadence. Again, I don't know, I could be completely off base, but I feel like instead of waiting maybe 4 to 5 years between every game, we'd maybe see a big game, then a smaller game, then a big game, maybe every like 2 to 3 years.
I mean, I think Days Gone should have been a smaller experience to begin with.
I think a Days Gone that like
no shade. No,
totally. But I mean, like in terms of, I know, a lot of your criticism in the review was especially related to like the length of it and how it kind of just kept going on. And I think if you boiled that experience down to like the Freaker hordes and fought a couple of them in maybe only a handful of biomes instead of the ones that were there, you get something that would be probably a more enriching overall smaller package, but something that's still really exciting because clearly there is something there.
Well, I maintain that there was something very, very strong at the heart of that game, and I know it's evolved. So please, in the comments, I know that it's a much stronger game and it's been patched and supported, and the dev has done a fantastic job at doing that.
Yeah.
But I just think from the jump, a more condensed experience would have made for a stronger one for me personally.
But and then Brian, just to your point about the value proposition of a game too, that's something that I think we're going to see transform even more when it comes to subscription services, because obviously Game Pass has dramatically changed that. And I think we saw that as early as Crackdown 3, because when that was coming out, IGN and a lot of other outlets reviewed it, pretty middle of the road, I would say, like not that highly. And a lot of people were upset at that. But I think because I saw a lot of the conversation around, I'm not paying any money for this game. It's just on my subscription. I can just jump into this game. And the same you were saying, like Destruction All-Stars, it will be $70 in a month and a half. But for now, everyone who has PlayStation Plus on PS5 can just jump into it. And I think it does... obviously we don't put the price of a game into our reviews here, but when you are a person who is trying to make a value judgment and you can spend $15 to play 100 games on Game Pass or, pay a PlayStation Plus subscription and get 3 free games a month, you might do that and then not buy the newest games until they're heavily discounted. I think subscription services are really going to change the way people also look at the value of a game, probably for better and worse. But
not only that, but I feel like subscription services are constantly there to remind you that maybe you shouldn't buy a game because in 3 weeks it might be quote unquote free on your subscription service. Like the amount of times that I've been like, I should buy this game, and it's like it's the Game Pass game the next month, or it's the PS Plus game the next month, and I'm just like, damn, I never know when to jump in. But I think that this sort of like value proposition thing, it applies to so many other mediums too. Like we had the Mortal Kombat movie trailer this week, and not only has the pandemic changed the way I care about what I will or will not watch, because at this point I'm just like, sure, give me all of it, I don't care anymore. But that's the kind of movie that 2 years ago would have been like, do you guys want to see this? Should we get tickets for opening weekend, or should we wait? Should we wait for the reviews to come in? And now I'm just like, oh, that will appear on my TV one day, and I can see like Shang Tsung and Goro rip the man's heart out, and like, yes, absolutely, no brainer, sure. Like it's not even a conversation to me. Like, no disrespect. I work for IGN. We're a reviews outlet. Someone is going to review Mortal Kombat, and they're going to be like 7 out of 10. I didn't like the part where this happened, or I don't care about any of that. Like, I think it's the same thing with Cloverfield Paradox, right? Like, that's a bad movie, but because I didn't have to do anything to watch it, it made it slightly better. And I do think that changes things a little bit.
If I could recommend,
what I watched
on the flip side, I had to review it immediately after watching it when it just dropped. And as a huge Cloverfield fan, that made me like it way less. When you think about it. But no, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
I just want to say, the other night, I watched the Human Centipede 2.
We've been
because it was on.
So that's where we're at. That is where we are at. I voluntarily sat down. I was like, I think I'll just watch Human Centipede 2.
My thing is, to go off record or off script a little bit here, but my thing has been just blaming the pandemic.
Script.
Yeah, blaming the pandemic for stuff I was doing anyway. Like I was like, oh, I imported these Japanese Nintendo toys from the Universal theme park since I can't go there because of the pandemic. And my wife was like, you would have done that. You've been doing that for the entire 10 years I've known you. Like, you just do that crap anyway. Don't blame the world for this.
But man, the overalls texture on that Mario doll is pretty incredible.
Really good. He's so cute.
He's so great. I know this is not PlayStation related, but it's so good.
And look, he walks.
I love it.
It's the best. Really.
I've been watching
YouTube
walkthroughs of people who got to go to the early access openings of that, just as my way of being able to experience it right now.
Me too. I've been doing exactly the same thing.
They hit
how sad.
All over the park. It's
I love it. Yeah. It's so great. We'll save
PlayStation needs a theme park that we can't go to. That's what.
Just bring back PSX and turn it into a theme park, please. Anyway, where were we on games? Games will be different in this year and also good in this year. That I think is a summation of what we're saying. But no, totally. It's going to be, I think, a very interesting year. And I think I wanted to bring all this up just to also remind myself of like, it is okay to go into this year knowing, I think we all kind of hoped things would be progressing a little faster than they are when it comes back to getting back to normalcy. But because they aren't, the devs will need to take their time. The games will come out when they're ready. I think like we have plenty to play. My backlog is so egregiously large that in the meantime, we will have plenty to talk about, plenty to play. And I'm looking forward to all these games, but I in no way want them to be rushed out, especially under the conditions everyone's having to make games right now. Anyway, with that said, on the PlayStation side, we're pretty late to this, so I don't want to spend a ton of time, but obviously the next big PlayStation adaptation of a game into a movie or TV show, aside from Uncharted, which I think is supposed to still come out this year. But anyway, The Last of Us is, of course, coming to HBO. And late last week, we got casting, both on the same day, of Pedro Pascal will be playing Joel, and Bella Ramsey, who played Lyanna Mormont in Game of Thrones, will be playing Ellie. I love this casting, even though I only know Bella Ramsey from being a smug asshole child for 5 minutes on Game of Thrones. Ellie's got a little bit of like world weariness to her where she's acting above her age. So I think she's going to bring that to that role pretty easily. Pedro is a wonderful human being who already has carted an orphan around a TV show, so he should probably be pretty good at this. I'm excited for this casting. Lucy, I'll start with you. How do you feel about the casting choices here?
Are you frozen for... Is Dorno frozen?
Am I frozen? Can you hear me?
He's frozen, but he's smiling. It's actually
oh
really
no!
This,
I'll refresh. You guys keep talking. I'll refresh. But
it's so funny. You look so happy. Should we keep going?
We can keep going. I want to say real quick. If I don't think it's a great movie, but Prospect, which is a movie that came out in 2018, is a movie where Pedro Pascal and his teenage daughter navigate a dystopian apocalypse in search of resources, and so that's a little on the nose. I'm not crazy about the film, but it's like it's got a little bit of Last of Us edge to it, and I dig it. It's a lot more like sort of hard sci-fi astronaut stuff, but if you want to see what it looks like for him to be in a scenario like that outside of On the Mandalorian, where he's his Ellie is
doing that.
A weird puppet frog that eats cookies, drools, and throws up. Love that show. But yeah, check out Prospect. It's totally worth looking at.
I think that like Pedro Pascal is a fantastic choice because he's one of those actors that goes all in, right? Like he never like schlubs it, right? He's always giving it 100%. I mean, you look at Wonder Woman 1984, which is a movie that I didn't particularly like, but I loved his performance because he just committed. He's so committed, and he so gives a shit.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I mean, for me, fantastic casting choice. In terms of Bella Ramsey, again, I don't know her outside of Game of Thrones. I mean, she's very young, but again, she was such a highlight of Game of Thrones. Like you could not, there were so many big characters. There were so many characters in Game of Thrones that, a lot of them were easily forgotten. But you did not forget her.
Yeah.
So, I think that they sound fantastic. One of the things that really pissed me off at the time was how people were so angry that she didn't look like Ellie. And I just, one thing that an actor doesn't have to look like their existing character. I mean, it was like Heath Ledger. Everyone thought he was going to be terrible because he was like a heartthrob, terrible as Joker. And look what he did,
Yeah.
Just remember that. Like, just remember Heath Ledger.
We should
I mean, in general.
Yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. And it's also like, it's understanding, and this is always tough with sort of like adaptations of source material, because I think you're totally right, Lucy. Like there is an expectation that it has to be completely sort of like spot on, one-to-one, and I don't think that's what they're going with here. In fact, in terms of just the general speculation of how the narrative for this show will unfold, I think I've seen a lot of people just sort of automatically assume that the first season of the show will be one-to-one with the first game, and the second season will be one-to-one with the second game. And I don't necessarily know if it'll roll out like that. In fact, I would be interested to see if they go a totally different direction with this. I mean, like the most sort of contemporary example of that is something like The Walking Dead, or Game of Thrones, where the book fans were constantly in your ear being like, I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen. And many times they were right. And other times they would deviate on the show wildly to varying degrees of success. And I think that like, that's really interesting. This is swinging for that Game of Thrones audience. That this is that big budget HBO prestige television. Like gamers, we're here, and we're definitely a huge market. But this is like they want your dad to watch this show.
Yeah.
Like they want people that like maybe don't even touch a console, and maybe will eventually go, oh, they make a game about this kind of stuff. Oh, let me check it out.
It's going to be so interesting if they keep that ending, though. Like, when I think of The Last of Us, I mean, it had such a powerful story that was such a huge reason that we loved it so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
It'll be very interesting if it's more just tonally that kind of thing, because like The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 have a very similar take on storytelling, right? Like they always zig when others would have zagged. And maybe that's kind of what it's going to be. It's not going to like, maybe that they won't have that ending, but maybe
Yeah.
it's that tonal thing that they're going to be going for, if that makes sense.
If
Yeah.
for me, it's a thing that I've always said about the show is because game adaptations can be such a minefield. So much of what makes The Last of Us, not even just that last ending bit, but a lot of what you do in the final act, so much of it works because you are Joel, because you are controlling that character, and whether or not you agree with him, you are in his shoes making those moves. And when you're watching something passively, it could still be an effective moment, but it's not effective in the same way, and it's not a commentary about storytelling in the same way that the game is. And so I do agree. I am fascinated and hope they take a different route with this one. I hope they, and Neil Druckmann being involved with Craig Mazin coming from the TV side and the game side together, I do hope they're kind of having those conversations, having those talks about what does this story look like in a passive medium versus an interactive one. And to your point, Brian, I totally don't expect them to do the game 1-to-1 for the season. Like if I had to guess right now, I would probably expect this to end right before winter. Just
Right.
on that cliffhanger, to me feels like a season ending sort of thing. But yeah, there's so many ways they could take this. There's so much of an ensemble cast within the world of The Last of Us that they can explore more episode by episode. There's a lot of routes they can take on this one along the way that I hope they do, that help make it its own unique thing.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that like the Last of Us 1 and 2 have two of my favorite video game endings ever. And favorite is a weird word to use there because they're sort of bleak and harrowing. Like,
I completely agree with you.
The most impactful. But also, I wonder how much the Naughty Dog leaks will affect this show, because if you look at the reality here, frankly, there was a lot of toxicity around the second game. There was a lot of people rushing to spoil that game for anybody else because they didn't like what they saw or what they read. And I think that like this isn't a Netflix show where they're dropping 10 episodes in one afternoon and you binge through the whole thing. This is going to be a thing that they will want to build momentum on week to week. They want that discussion. That was one of the things that made Game of Thrones the most popular show on TV. I hate to continually bring up Game of Thrones because everyone knows the last season wasn't great. But in terms of like building momentum, in terms of like reaching a global audience, it was sort of unprecedented at the time. And I really don't want to get us in a scenario where this show starts to build momentum, gets a bunch of people watching it, and then there's just like 1,000 people being like, oh, well, here's what happens in the final episode 6 weeks before that happens. So I do want them to deviate from the source material, although that's going to be tough because like that's such a great outline for especially that first
isn't
game.
it?
To skip all of that and I trust they'll go in a different direction, because if you look at the showrunners on the show and you watch Chernobyl, like, damn, like that is,
Chernobyl was amazing.
But yeah, I do hope that this isn't a scenario where they go 1-to-1, it's all outlined, and then some people have the opportunity to sort of spoil the show for everybody else. Because I want that to be able to impact people the way it impacted us when we experienced it for the first time.
Yeah, it'll definitely be an interesting case to see what they keep that is similar with the game and where they do deviate, but they have a lot of potential to do that. And I at least trust the creative team to make those decisions very, very considered. Like I definitely think there's probably a ton going into the direction they're taking the show. I'm sure it is a thing they are thinking beyond this first season, because this franchise is huge. HBO probably wants this to be a success. Like absolutely, in my mind, this is their next Game of Thrones bet. This is their hopeful like Emmy crossover where it's both genre but really critically acclaimed. Like I think there's a lot of hope behind this show really being a hit, and I imagine they're taking those talks into consideration for sure of where they want to take it. But yeah, it's a very interesting one to look forward to. We have no idea exactly when it's going to premiere, so it's definitely a ways off, but it's an exciting one to look forward to. Even if I think the game works so well as a game, I am, hopeful the show turns out well, but we'll definitely have to see it put into practice. A fun thing that they'll also have to deal with, though, as you were saying, Brian, leaks. Both of the casting announcements came via like Deadline and THR and things like that, where I saw, like Neil Druckmann was tweeting and congratulating the actors, and Pedro was tweeting about, and all these things. Game production is often much more secretive, whereas the trades and movies and TV leak things. We knew Tatiana Maslany was going to be She-Hulk like a year before they announced her as She-Hulk. Those things happen quite often. So it's going to be really interesting to see the production of the show probably come to light in a lot of ways when game production doesn't come to light that way.
I don't know if you guys watched like Lost or a show like it, as it aired, but one of the big conversational things culturally around that show was basically reading the episode credits before the new episode would hit and know exactly like which characters would appear in that episode. That's something that happens for various reasons in Hollywood. And that's going to continue to happen here. So I do think that's sort of fascinating. Like there will like I was saying before, there's just like a transparency that happens in filmmaking and TV that, we don't really see as much on the gaming side. It's just much more secretive world.
Absolutely. And just to blow through things, because I know we're running short on time, just briefly wanted to mention with the class action lawsuit that is being put into place. A firm has filed a lawsuit against Sony related to DualSense drift. So Joy-Cons are apparently not the only controllers dealing with stick drift. There's apparently been cases, people reporting online on Reddit and other forums as early as, the first couple weeks after the PS5 came out. This class action lawsuit is saying that Sony knowingly deceived people and were aware of these issues. Obviously, that's something that a lawsuit would have to prove with some hard evidence to show. But clearly, DualSense drift is an issue that is ongoing. The IGN news team is definitely looking into the severity of it, how widespread it is, because there have been a number of different issues when it comes to the PS5 since launch. But knowing that this is something that has been caught in the first few months of the console's life versus something that Nintendo kind of let go on for years with the Joy-Cons, hopefully we can see some resolution to this. Hopefully new lines of DualSenses can avoid these issues. But just as a warning out there to any new PS5 owners, DualSense drift may happen to you. And then last but not least, just on the news front, briefly wanted to mention, just wanted to bring back Silent Hill Watch, because this feels like this is going to be an ongoing thing for us this year. Apparently not only is one Silent Hill game maybe in the works, but multiple games may be in the works. In an interview with GameIndustry.biz, Bloober Team, which are the developers behind The Medium, Blair Witch, and some other horror games, and just a really fun studio name to say, announced that they were working on another horror IP with a very famous publisher. VGC then reported that they had sources saying that this was in fact a Silent Hill game, and that there are other Silent Hill games in development, including a project with a prominent Japanese developer. With potential release for the summer. Konami has not confirmed these things. We haven't gotten official word or anything on that. But this is the latest report from VGC, which has tended to get some pretty some stuff right before I believe were the ones to leak the Super Mario 3D All-Stars collection first of anyone, some other big things in the last year or two. I briefly just wanted to mention this because, we talked about it a lot last week. It feels like we're getting closer to Silent Hill happening. For anyone who has had experience with Bloober, do they feel like a good fit for Silent Hill? For those who might know The Medium or Blair Witch?
I feel like they're a good fit for a smaller Silent Hill.
Gotcha.
I mean, and that's not just because they typically make smaller games. They have a very distinctive style of horror. I would like to see them take a smaller slice of the Silent Hill universe. I'm still maintain that Silent Hill should be developed by a Japanese developer, the next entry.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm pleased that we're hearing that there is that rumor that a Japanese developer is working on a Silent Hill game.
Yeah.
Again, it's just because Silent Hill is so the horror is so distinctly Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a very distinctive style. It's a very distinct tone. It's lifted a lot from Japanese horror cinema. And I feel when Western devs take it on, it sort of feels like an approximation. It's just not quite the same. And as I said in our last episode, like, that's not to say that the Western developed Silent Hills were all terrible. There were some good ones in there for sure, but like, I want to see it return to its Japanese horror roots.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. I'm playing through the Medium right now on Series X, and it's super cool, and you can completely, in 5 minutes of playing it, understand why they can and potentially should make a Silent Hill game. But I'm kind of with Lucy too. I would like to see that. I mean, I think Bloober is like a really interesting studio because they love horror, and I don't think they're great at totally nailing it, but they're getting better and better with each game, like consistently every time. And I play all of their games. Every single time I'm like, I don't know if I totally love this, and then I play the next one, I'm like, I like this one a little more, and the next one I like the Medium more than I like Blair Witch. I think both of them have like some really strong ideas, and I think they're building towards the next thing. And I love watching a studio like that grow. Like, it's such a more interesting story than seeing a studio get worse and worse over time, which obviously we've seen that happen as well. And so, yeah, I hope that comes together. I am okay with like multiple studios at the same time making different Silent Hill games. The other weird thing that sort of came out of this rumor was it kind of like spilled out this morning about how Konami were hypothetically interested in allowing other developers to tackle the Metal Gear and Castlevania franchises.
Yeah,
and
so, I was going to bring that up.
And so we have like these sort of 3 awesome vintage Konami franchises that they aren't doing anything with. I don't think that they have the internal power anymore to like make something up to the standards that somebody would want from any of those things. Nor should they, because I think there's like kind of like a lot of stink in the air about like, especially something like Metal Gear. That was just not a great story, the way their relationship ended with Kojima. And the same for Igarashi with Castlevania. And like I just feel like that you have this sort of vintage awesome video game studio that made some bad decisions in the last decade or so, who are sitting on 3 fantastic franchises that people still really love, and I would love to see them go into the hands of competent developers outside of the walls of Konami, who get to do cool stuff with it. And like, there are so many people that can make a great Castlevania game or a great Metal Gear game or a great Silent Hill game, and I really hope they let that happen.
Yeah, it the VGC report notes that any potential release for those in particular are years away, but I'm right there with you. One, I'll happily fall prey to Konami putting a collection together of the GBA Castlevania games if they want to. But yeah, I'm really excited what the potential of other devs taking on these franchises could do, especially with the creators of them having moved on and there having been such public breakups with Konami. I think taking a blank slate approach of where can we bring this next with new ideas outside of Konami is a really exciting potential for what could happen there.
We should like collectively as an industry and fans make a pact that if Konami puts the GBA Castlevania games on PlayStation, we will never make another pachinko joke again. Ever. No one ever will. We will retire it. I'll put it away forever. I swear on everything. If I can play like Area of, like basically any of the
Circle
GBA
of the Moon, yeah.
Oh my god.
I would happily.
I don't even care. I'll buy a pachinko machine. I don't care. Put it in my house.
Konami water bottles. I think they make like running machines. Like I'll buy whatever you want. Just make.
I'll exercise for Castlevania.
I want this to come true, and I want like next year to see you that background just be a bunch of pachinko machines.
You've been to Japan. Have you been in a pachinko parlor before?
Yes, I have. It is a sensory assault. Yes.
It is like, it's like 60 machine guns having sex at the same time while smoking cigarettes. I walked into one, and like with Mitch Dyer, who used to work at IGN, we walked in, went upstairs, and went back downstairs. We were in there for maybe 90 seconds, and I came out deaf and sick. I legitimately had like a cold for 5 days because it's just condensed cigarettes and then just like gang 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 gang. It's just
It can put
yeah.
Las Vegas
That's
casinos to
sick.
shame. It's
Oh my
incredible.
god! Oh my god! Yeah.
It's also COVID soup. Like, God,
Oh,
imagine,
God, yeah.
imagine that place now.
Oh man, yeah. It'll probably be a few years before I even contemplate stepping into a pachinko parlor in Japan,
Yeah.
or a Las Vegas casino for that matter. But anyway, before we wrap up, I did briefly want to read one memory card story. This one comes in from Sam, who wrote in to beyond@ign.com with the subject line memory card, which you can do as well if you want to share your weird, wacky, strange, peculiar, funny, whatever memories of your PlayStation gaming life. This is somewhat of a follow-up tangentially to the pet chewing through the controller cables. We had a story about, I believe it was a rabbit who chewed through a controller cable. This one is somewhat related to a broken controller cable, but it goes places you're probably not expecting. I'm going to avoid saying any names also just to protect those involved, I guess, even if some of them are assholes, as you'll learn. But anyway, I digress. Sam wrote in and said,
ready.
Back when SingStar was a phenomenon, I was working in retail over the New Year's period. My colleague and I decided to spend New Year's Eve together, drinking and playing SingStar with our respective girlfriends. After many poorly sung songs, we took a break and played some drinking games. On our return to the lounge, I found my work colleague with a SingStar mic in one hand and a cut mic cable in the other. We immediately jumped to the conclusion and blamed my girlfriend's very yappy dog, and that was the end of our SingStar games for the evening. Karma, I guess, clearly just didn't like our singing at the time. A couple of months later, though, the colleague and his girlfriend broke up. I bumped into that ex-girlfriend and asked her what had happened. She told me I was the reason they broke up, and she thanked me. I was perplexed. She explained that I had mentioned that the colleague was good friends with our other male colleague, which was surprising to her. She then noticed lots of late-night text messages from that other male colleague and him, and wanted to know what they were up to. She discovered that the contact details were fake, and it was actually the phone number of a girl he was cheating on with. Lastly, she told me that the colleague admitted that he had used scissors to cut the SingStar controller cable on New Year's because he wanted to stop playing SingStar and go meet up with this other girl.
What the fuck?
Karma
What
gods
a psycho!
restored. An incredible turn of events, because they opened the email by saying this is also about cut controller cables. So I'm like, okay, some like pet got into the controller cables, like someone has a snake who ate a controller or something. Nope. Anyway, thank you, Sam, for writing in with that.
To like, that is so deranged.
Yep.
Like, I need to. He couldn't have come up with some other dumb excuse. Like, he actually just had to cut the cable.
Right?
Like, that is wild.
Yeah.
I suppose it's effective.
So insane.
I know.
That is crazy.
It is wild. So Sam, thank you for writing in. Thank you for sharing that story. And again, if you want to share a story about your PlayStation gaming life, whatever it may entail, you can write into beyond@ign.com with the subject line memory card. Briefly before we wrap up, just wanted to mention either one, anything you want to plug, or two, anything that you've been watching, listening, or reading to that you want to also plug as well. Brian, I'll start with you.
I won't say too much about it because Lucy's going to watch it tonight, but please watch Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar. It's super funny. It just dropped. I think it's like $20. It's one of those, like, this would have been in theaters in a normal time, but it's not. So here it is. It's probably the hardest I've laughed in the entire pandemic. So yeah, check that out.
Excited.
Awesome. And Lucy, what about you? Anything?
Yeah, I'm weirdly returning to Westworld. I was one of those people that fell off midway through season 2, but I'm returning to it with my girlfriend who hasn't seen it before, and that first season is so good, just so strong. And I'm I didn't even realize it was still going, to be honest. I thought it had kind of like been cancelled after season 3, but it's still going. So I think I'm going to watch it through and see where they go, because apparently season 3 is very, very different. So yeah, I'm back on the Westworld train.
I jumped off at about the same time. So yeah, knowing that it's still ongoing, we've planned to check back in, just haven't in forever. But yeah, I might have to do that as well. The only thing I'll mention is, because it's been literal comfort food for me as well. Thank you again. A few people reached out and mentioned you had checked out Sorted, the YouTube channel I recommended last week. Another food YouTube channel that I watch, which probably a lot of people know of, but it's just been a more recent thing for me, is Binging with Babish. Basically, the channel is a guy who recreates foods from movies and TV shows and games, and tries to then put his own spin on them. It's also sort of been his journey of becoming a better chef chef and understanding the world of cooking more. And so it's been a really fun thing to like go back and see the progression of. But there's also another particular series on there called Stump Sola, and it stars Sola Al-Wali from who previously was at Bon Appetit and was one of the employees there who stood up and was very loud and brought attention to the fact that people of color at Bon Appetit were not being paid fair wages for being on video. Anyway, so she has a series on binging with Babish where essentially he comes up with a different grouping of things each time they do it, and it's essentially trying to stump her cooking skills because she's a brilliant cook. So some of them are like she had to do a bodega Thanksgiving meal. I think one was doing like a freeze-dried birthday celebration, like just all these weird combinations of things. They're really fun to watch. There's just so much creativity in the cooking going on there. I highly recommend checking it out if you haven't before. But that's
awesome.
It's really great. But that's pretty much going to wrap us up for this week's episode of Podcast Beyond. Thank you so much, Brian and Lucy, for joining me for this week. Thank you to our producer, Mariah, for helping us make this show actually happen. And thank you, of course, to all of you out there watching and or listening to this episode. Remember, Beyond is normally live Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Pacific at beyond.ign.com, youtube.com/IGNBeyond, and your favorite podcast services around the world. We'll see you all next week. But in the meantime, we hope you stay safe. We hope you stay well. And as always, Beyond.
Beyond.